Hi, this is Dr. Mary Kay Keller, and I am your podcaster of Life is a Learning Curve. And today we have Judith Pellegrino, who is going to be talking about taking responsibility for your physical, emotional, and spiritual health. So Judith has a certification in holistic health and 20 years of integrating holistic health practices to supplement recovery for multiple addictions. Her certification is in holistic health, and she's completed leadership and action programs through the Landmark Education. She is also a soulful storyteller. So Judith, with that, tell us a little about what you want us to know today.
So I want people to know that I learned that I didn't know how to take responsibility for my health and well-being. When I was at the age of 34, I actually had a bottom, a physical, emotional, and spiritual bottom. And while coming up, I learned how to actually manage my health and well-being. And I realized that this is not in the mainstream, or it hasn't been in the mainstream to actually teach people how to take responsibility for their health and well-being. They get nutrition in school, and they get that, they're to stay away from drugs and alcohol, and, try not to, do X, Y, and Z to, hurt themselves. And what I learned is there is so much that young people really need to know in order to want to take responsibility for their health and well-being, and how to actually do that. For instance, if somebody is like wanting to change their diet, okay, great, you have a diet. But is that diet right for you? We have something called bioindividuality. And in order for us to get the right nutrition, we need to visit a nutritionist, somebody who has studied nutrition for 5 years of their life, to know how much of each food group belongs in a particular body at a particular age and for what activity. Now, there is no diet on the planet that's going to give anybody that information. There's a lot of fad diets and a lot of misinformation out there. And one of the things that has served me, and I call it sound nutrition, it's where I actually know how much of what particular food group is to go in my body and how many times a day. I do weigh and measure my food. I grew up in a family of compulsive overeating and food addiction. The majority of the people in my family are actually morbidly obese. They never found recovery. My mother died of this disease. She wasn't willing to do anything different. She continued to medicate herself with food, believing that was the only solution for her. So that's part of why I'm passionate about getting the message out to young people in particular. I mean, I could tell people of all ages how to take care of their body, mind, and spirit, and it would serve them, but it's so hard for them to change after a certain point because they don't have the time. They're raising their children. They don't they're off being a single parent. There's all kinds of reasons that get in the way of people actually taking their health and well-being and putting that as a priority. And there's another piece of the equation too, is like I had become addicted to food. And what I didn't know was that that was not my fault. I have a predisposition through my DNA to be addicted to food, to be a compulsive overeater when something goes wrong. If a problem arises, that would be my go-to. What I didn't know was that it wasn't my fault. It was my responsibility. It wasn't until I had an experience of full-blown food addiction, to the point where I promised myself I'm not going to eat a particular negative or harmful foods. And so I made up my mind. I packed good food with me, and I went to 2 different picnics, and I ate the food I packed, everything I could get my hands on at both the picnics. And when I went to a 3rd event, it was for fireworks, I ate everything at that spread plus a snack I packed because I'm getting back on the track. And I ate everything that I could get my hands on at that barbecue. And when I got home, I ate 3 bags of popcorn, of which one was burnt. That's the day I woke up and said, oh my God, I've got a problem. And so it was as a result of learning that I had a problem that I actually sought recovery from the food addiction. And inside of that is where I learned how to actually manage my food. I didn't even know how much food belonged in my body. I had no idea that if I set particular times to eat and I actually followed through, that I was going to feel better physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And I don't believe that people should have to wait to get into a 12-step recovery program to learn the basics about life and how to support themselves physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Don't get me wrong. It's wonderful that, that I was given that information and in 12-step recovery, but it's something that should be in the mainstream. That is my core belief. And that's why I actually sought the certification in holistic health, because I saw what a difference that made. It made a difference in my temperament. I was able to handle things emotionally that I was not able to handle when I was eating certain foods. What I didn't understand too was there are certain substances like alcohol and cigarette smoking that actually deplete B vitamins from the body. And what do we need for our nervous system but B vitamins? And there's also something when people eat too much sugars and flours and processed foods, that it upsets the digestive tract. And there's something called candida. This candida is yeast, and it literally can eat through the intestinal tract. And when it does that, the nutrients are actually escaping instead of being absorbed in the body. So when people aren't nourished properly, they're not able to think, they're not able to process their emotions. And then it feels like life becomes so unbearable at times. Life is hard enough without having to do it being not nourished in your body, mind, and spirit. So that is why I wanted to, take this opportunity to talk to people about nourishing their body, mind, and spirit, taking responsibility. It's not our fault, but we are responsible for what goes in our mouth. We are responsible for making sure that what we put in our mouth is actually going to nourish us. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we're not eating foods that corporations are trying to get us to eat so they can make money off of us. And there's nothing wrong with people making their money, but it's wrong if it's at the expense of the health and well-being of the people they're trying to serve. And a lot of times that, I believe, it started as ignorance, but now they're being informed, and some companies are making the adjustments and some don't care. And the ones, we have got to protect ourselves. And the easiest way to do that is to actually just stick to living foods, ones that haven't been tainted or processed. And if anybody says, oh, I don't have time for that, there are strategies. The most it takes me to put food together in the morning, afternoon, or night is 10 minutes. 10 minutes for each meal. It takes time to plan it. It takes time to buy it. Yes. But at the same time, what is the cost of the time? What is the cost of, finances even, if your health is not what it needs to be? If you are making decisions that aren't in your highest and best interest because you're not nourished. It's like there's a cost. It cost my mother her life. It even cost my father, who was taking care of her because she couldn't take care of herself. She couldn't bathe herself. She couldn't walk. I mean, what took her out was the fact that the flap of skin over her belly developed a infection. It was Pseudomonas and Enterococcus, which are extremely aggressive bacteria. And they ate her. They ate under that skin, and the doctors tried to get ahead of it, and they couldn't. And there was a woman, and I'm going to tell a soulful story, that I was in the hospital with my mother, and some nurse was flittering in and out of the room. And she goes, "Have you seen your mother's wounds?" I said, "I was told they're like 3 fists across." I said, "I would probably faint." She said, "No, they're much worse." She said, "You on your best day couldn't come back from this." And that's when I knew that my mother's life was over, and that the food that she wasn't letting go of was taking her out. And she was gone within a couple hours.
Judy, I'm so sorry. That must have been horrible to watch her go like that. And, and I couldn't help thinking about what you were saying earlier, because people don't realize that addictions are not, the conversations I've had this week with other podcasts, we all come back to the same thing. One, I heard there's no shame, because shame stands for should have already mastered everything already, and what you're saying is, and what we realize is that, a lot of times, a lot of what we're doing is like, we haven't caught up with the science because it's been passed down generation to generation, and so it's not even about blaming our parents anymore. Like, whether we're talking about food addictions or alcoholism, they all have the same impact on children. And one of the things that the constant theme that's come up is that we really don't have this type of education in our schools. And so because we don't talk about things like addiction, I mean, the list is every podcast I come up with a new item on the list of things we don't talk about in our society, and these are the things that we need to be talking about, because this is what we need to know going forward. If we don't have information, we can't make the changes. And what I really liked about your passion just now was that you're talking about, let's not blame ourselves, but let's get real about what we really need to do, and then kind of presenting this information so that people have tools to be able to make those changes in their life, and that your passion is about prevention, is what I keep hearing, is that and this is true of everything. The earlier we start in children's lives, talking about food, talking about money, talking about sexuality, talking about spirituality, all of these things that we think are adult topics that kids can't understand, we lose 18 years of their life in coaching them. And then, let's take it over to sex for a second, because everybody can relate to this that's had children. So if you haven't talked to your kids about sexuality and what's going on in their bodies for 12 or 13 years, and then you sit down and go, okay, we need to have the birds and the bees talk because we're worried about them having sex and getting pregnant or catching something, or we want to prevent that. How comfortable do you think that child is having that conversation at 13 when it hasn't been cultivated for 13 years, And they're going like this, Mom, Dad, oh my God, that's an appropriate response because that's never been in that relationship, So I really admire what your message and what you're about here. I know I had my own reckoning after I moved up here to Delaware, and I think I shared this with you before, but I was decided, like, I've had to narrow my foods over the years. I discovered that I was dairy intolerant. It actually makes me really sick. It was really hard for me to give up. I love my cheeses, and then I was able to find a good alternate substitute. Now I actually a lot of times I'll make my own, but I was standing in Wawa one day. For all of our listeners around the globe, Wawa is a big deal here in Delaware and some of the northeastern states. So it's a gas station with a convenience store in it. So I go in and I'm driving, and I thought I need my raspberry tea because whenever I'm out driving, I have a tendency to get sleepy when I drive. So it's the only time I use caffeine, because I can't use caffeine because it gives me heart palpitations. And I didn't know that. I get a chiropractor help me figure that one out. After numerous doctor's visits, sometimes nobody was able to help me except the natural people, chiropractic, holistic health. I've been a follower now for quite some time because I was getting real answers there. So I go in the store and I've been tracking my sugar, and believe it or not, people, just tracking your sugar grams, I've been losing 20 pounds a year. I wasn't morbidly obese, but I wasn't where I wanted to be either. And so I'm standing in Wawa and I couldn't help myself. I thought I started to grab it just out of habit. And then all of a sudden I thought, okay, you've been practicing this. Why would you not look at the sugar grams in your raspberry tea? So I did, and I couldn't help it. Out of my mouth, I went, holy Toledo, and this woman 4 doors down was pulling herself a drink, and she stops and she's looking at me, and I'm like, 45 freaking grams of sugar in this. And she looks at me and she turns her bottle around and she looks at hers and she said 65 in this one. I said, I'm going for water. And then I shared with her, I've been losing 20 pounds a year, and that's all I've been doing. I hadn't changed anything else that year. And the other thing is I noticed I've changed certain things about my diet. I've had to go a little more slowly, like one thing at a time, because for me, it gives me a kickback. Like then I want more of it but I've noticed if I do it really slowly, and I want to be quiet here, I just wanted to share that with you because I want to see what your response to all that is and what more you have to share with our listeners today. But thank you so much for the way you presented that, because I do think our youth need to be exposed to this earlier rather than later.
Well, thank you so much for all the things that you've said. And when you were talking about the sex piece, one of the thoughts that hit me was, when girls menstruate and like I had PMS all the time. Well, that went away when I cleaned up my diet. I didn't have to deal with that, like all those highs and lows and whatnot. The other thing I needed to do at that time also was to rest. That's a time where the body is going through so many different processes, and there's a reason we get tired, because we're supposed to rest. So, there's just little things like that can make a difference. Then the other piece was, so when I had lost weight very quickly just by cleaning up my diet. It's like, so I didn't eat cheese, so I didn't eat bread. I stopped eating deli. Boom. I was like down to like, a normal body size very quickly. But I also, I had decreased the fat so much that I lost my period for an entire year. And I was thrilled, like at the time, because I guess I grew up in that mentality of, that the curse or whatever, like it's a bad thing. And I'm thinking that it was good. I had no idea what that did to my body, to not have that cycle for a year. And it took me, like, I had to go back to the nutritionist and say, okay, I need to gain some weight. And it was one of the hardest things. So just to let people know that why it was hard is because the disease of compulsive overeating actually has another face. There's another side, and it's called anorexia. So I went from one extreme to another, and I didn't know. And that's when I learned about that side of the disease. And it was like really hard to say, okay, I got to go from the size 6 to the size 8. And it happened very easily when the nutritionist gave me the right amount of food. But it was, it's not like they get it right away, but they're very close, and it's our responsibility. And this is part of why I say, take responsibility. It was my responsibility to tell that nutritionist something's amiss. I'm not menstruating or whatever. So, but I was so happy not menstruating. It was not a good thing though. Please don't get me wrong. It was not a good thing. I believe that I am possibly even suffering consequences from the result of that. It's something that my balance can be off at times, neurologically and things like that. So everything is it's a delicate balance, and we have to be, to treat our bodies with respect. And
Yes.
it's not a goal. It is a process. And the sooner we get on that path, the better. And one of the things that I learned at this school was, like, when you introduce cleaner foods, eat less of this and that, that's no good, and start incorporating some practices, gentle practices, things that are, nurturing, that something takes over. And it starts to it like gains momentum, and that's the direction you start moving. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I started in recovery, then I started to read and, receive a lot of information. I would go to workshops. I was just sucking up all the information I could to help myself and my family. And it's like, it just set a ball in motion. And that's what I'm hoping for the listeners to be able to just take away, is like understanding it's your responsibility. And just by making little starts, it can create a momentum to keep going. And so I guess I'd like to leave it there for that particular part, if that's okay.
Well, no, that's great, because, I just had an epiphany I want to share with you. So we're sitting here talking about food and our health and how it makes us feel. And what I see out there is that it's more about how we look. And I think more so for women, maybe, than men. I don't know, because I'm not a man. I haven't had that experience. I don't hear them talk a lot about it. But, looking at the way people market and advertise to us, with women growing up in a culture, like I know for myself, like I shared with you, mine wasn't from it wasn't from addiction. It was medication that the doctor put me on. Did not know that he could trigger obsessive compulsivity. I didn't know what was wrong with me, because I had been tiny. I was like 5 foot going into high school, 5'2" when I came out. I probably never weighed more than 118 pounds. Even after I had my babies, people would be like, "You've had kids?" Because I was blessed that way. I wouldn't say it came off fast. I mean, I was nursing like every other mom, and it took about a year, but, I got back to the place of living my life. And then suddenly, when this event in our life happened, and I went on medication because of the event. We had a traumatic, what do you call it? We had a traumatic event in our family. That's all I want to go forward with that. So, and it reeled me, I was feeling emotions and things that extreme hatred that I had never tapped into before, and I was so uncomfortable. And so the doctor said, let me give you something just to get you through this. She says, once you're through this process, and, time has moved past, she says, I'm not saying that you'll be over it or that you'll be better, but let's just ease you through it, And I had never been one for prescriptions, but I decided to do it in this case. And then I blew up in 1 year to 100 pounds. I mean, I went up 100 pounds in 1 year. And then it just, the struggle with it, what happened inside of me is the more I get out there and try to get back into running and try to do it, and I get so tired and overwhelmed and depressed, because I'd look in the mirror and I didn't recognize myself. I didn't know who I was anymore, because I had bought into this thing about how we look, and it really brought up a lot of different issues for me. Like, just listening to you talk about it, I thought, okay, so now I'm getting all that weight off, and I'm feeling better about myself. And yes, I do look better, but I realized that as a woman in this society, so much, like, I had a lot of anger inside, and I had to start working through that as well. It was kind of a gift in a way, not that my body is benefited from that necessarily, but it was kind of a gift, because I started looking at how long in my life I had actually felt invisible, because people would look at me more for my looks, and I would just be furious. I have a brain in here, and I was a quiet child, but an intelligent child. And I just wanted somebody to see my intelligence, when I was a child, and even as a teenager, and, going forward. And so, I think there could be a variety of people listening to this podcast who would benefit not only from the addiction piece of it, but also something that derailed them in their life, that just kind of triggered it. And so we're all in this together, and I'm really curious about some of the things. Do you want to share some of the things in particular that whatever you want to do going forward? I was just kind of curious about some of the takeaways people could take today. What if they could have just a couple of changes? For instance, like for me, what it was, I'll tell you what it was. I started focusing in for 1 year. I took a whole year because I thought, this is going to take time, on just drinking more water, because I was not a water drinker. And so I thought I just need to start flushing my system. No matter what else I do right now, I'm going to drink 6 to 8 glasses a day. Do I do it perfectly? Absolutely not. Sometimes I get busy and I forget, but I've noticed I've got like water all over the house, and it prompts me, and I'll think, oh, I haven't drank water in about an hour, so I'll drink even a small glass of water. At first I couldn't drink a whole glass of water. And so I had to push myself a little bit. And the thing is, some people, I see them, they go out there and they make these radical changes, they go forward, and they're so blessed. Like they just do it, and I'm one of those ones that, I have to introduce it slowly, because I've realized there's a part of me that just seems to resist that. And do you know what that brings me back to? You had something that you had shared with me in your opening about, this is for people who hate themselves. And I thought, sometimes this really is, most of the time, I think it is about not respecting ourselves, and that we really tap into some kind of self-hatred or even guilt. I think there's a lot of emotions that coincide with food, that we attach to food, especially if we've been emotionally deprived. And I'm going to end with this. When I started reading this book, Permission to Feel, that I heard on Brene Brown's podcast the other day, one of the things he said in there was, our parents couldn't give us something they didn't have. Nobody taught them, and therefore they didn't teach us. And I realized in that moment, there's so many areas of our lives for most of us that somebody didn't know how to guide us on. I mean, I'm not saying all parents do bad jobs. I'm just saying, it's not perfect. And so there may be an area in our lives, maybe we weren't guided emotionally on how to identify our feelings. And that, I think, is huge for addiction issues, because emotions are definitely an undercurrent stream, whether we're not paying attention to them or whether we're allowing them to rule our lives. Because you also talked about addiction in the sense of, that sense of control there. I kind of thought I heard you edging up on it. One of the things I've realized is that there's a difference between more often tells me there's some kind of an addiction. There's some kind of a deep well that's trying to be filled and it can't be filled. But the word enough is the healthy word for me now. It's like, okay, when have I had enough? When have I done enough? When am I enough? And it's about the enoughness of it. And like you were talking about, not knowing the exact amount of food. We need to know what our enough equals to, so we can stop.
So on that note, there's so many different things that I hope I touch on, that you touched on. The whole idea of being enough is the opposite of the self-hatred.
Yes.
Okay, so self-hatred tells me I'm not enough. Whatever I do, whatever I think, whatever I say, it's never enough. And addiction feeds on that whole I'm not enough thing. Okay, but I also want to share that in addiction, there's something that distinguishes addiction from a bad habit. Okay, so with addiction, there's a physical allergy where there's actually a craving. There's the mental obsession where that's all I'm going to think about, and I'll tell you a story in a minute. And a tendency towards unmanageability, where life becomes unmanageable. I'm not thinking right. Everything is so hard. Okay, like those three components make up that addiction piece. So, and then there's 3 phases. There's a problem phase, a hard phase, and the lost the power of choice phase. And if you're in full-blown addiction, you don't have the choice anymore. The only choice you have is to say, I've lost my choice. And And that's when, for myself, the solution was a spiritual awakening, a psychic change. That is the only way I know personally of how to overcome an addiction. Some people say they had an addiction. I just recently listened to one of the TED Talks or whatever, where they mentioned that they had the physical allergy to alcohol and they couldn't stop. They didn't have a problem, like with emotions or whatever. They had a lot of self-confidence, but their life was going to hell in a handbasket because they were addicted to alcohol. Well, they took a pill for it. There was a pill for it, and that's what they did, and they were okay. So, for somebody who is an addict, who has the low self-esteem, they have the physical allergy, the mental obsession, the queer mental twist, the tendency towards unmanageability, the only solution I know of for that is a 12-step room. But somebody else who just has a physical allergy to alcohol, they can't stop because that physical allergy is just like plaguing them. Well, yep, there's a pill for it. I don't know what the side effects are. I don't know the name of it, but I was blown away. Like, it was one of those learning moments for me that some people might not have the full-blown pieces, for addiction. And that brings me to the point of drugs also is, I'm not saying drugs are bad. I know that there's a purpose. People have good intentions. But what I do know is that if something can be prevented, why not? Okay.
Yes.
Versus, okay, so I'm obese now, let me take a pill for it. I don't know that that's going to work. And the side effects are way worse than the actual problem. To me, that's where my passion comes in. It's like, if something could be prevented, why not take that road versus after everything is said and done, now I'm just going to turn to a drug because I'm looking for the quick fix. I don't have time for this, and then you're at the mercy of a drug company, and you're also at the mercy of the side effects that are like 10 times worse. Oh, you're bleeding. You have all kinds of like horrific side effects that, like, I'm just thinking like I would need a pill or something else to help me from the side effects. I just, it goes against everything I know, as far as like trying to prevent. There was something else that you had mentioned, and I think it was in the sex realm or whatever. And I have to tell you, like, that was a huge source of self-hatred for me. Sexuality, period. And no pun intended, but I literally, like, I can remember, as a child, being told that if I touched myself, that my hands would be chopped off. I was,
that's pretty dramatic.
That's one way to get a kid not to touch themselves, And as an adult, that was really, a source of pain for me too, because it's something that would be very natural, in a marriage even, but I'm like, oh no, I can't do it, So like my head was still in that space of what I heard as a child. And, when I started menstruating, and this is a funny story, I rode a horse. It's funny and it's not, it's a little tragic. I had first time ridden a horse. The horse stood up like the Lone Ranger, and charged to the barn, and I'm screaming, and I swear I don't know how I held on, but I did. And the guy who got the horse screamed at me for screaming. You're scaring the horse. You're scaring the horse. But that was the day I got my period. And it was, I think, the fright could have even brought it on. And nobody celebrated my being a woman. It was like they made fun of me for having, this experience and getting your period, like that took the precedence over this milestone. And I can just remember like just hating myself every time I got my period. And I played sports even with a white uniform, by the way, basketball, which is a pretty rigorous sport, and try and walk around and run around and jump around with a pad like that. It was very difficult.
Yeah.
And so I was always worried that somebody would see it.
Right.
So there's a lot of different things that created like shame. And I didn't even know that throughout my life that I was using food to comfort myself,
To make you feel
especially at
better.
those times.
Right.
Yes.
Well, something you just said there, I had another one of those spark moments, because when we talk about low self-esteem, it's hard to pull yourself out of anything when you have low self-esteem, and that's something else that I think many people, I'm sure all the chaos going on in the country has a lot to do with that. For my own experience, what I found was that my low self-esteem didn't come up, no matter how hard I tried, self-affirmations, all that stuff, until I started throwing tons of self-compassion at myself. And when I would make a mistake, would say, was this something, if I did something intentional, I need to clean that up. I need to responsibility was thrown at me as a child. Like it was a really negative, dirty word too. It was like, you need to be responsible, and it was like, okay, when you're 5, you don't even know what the word responsible means. Could you break that down? Tell me what that looks like. Show me what that looks like, from people that usually weren't being responsible. There's the other dichotomy, So then you've got that issue on top of it. So it gets very complicated. And my point is, life is confusing for children when big people don't use their words, and don't demonstrate it, and that's not, we've all done it. I'm sure my kids felt conflicted because I didn't learn all this stuff, until after they were growing up, and then I like bring it home and they're like, what? Because that ship had sailed, kind of thing. So, I was looking at that and I thought, but the self-compassion piece of it, just saying, look, I didn't know this before. I know this today. So I can start with it today. And it doesn't mean, it means like we're back to baby steps sometimes, we just learned how to roll over. So we can't crawl when we just learned how to roll over. We have to then, figure out how to get up on all fours so we can crawl, And so that's why this podcast is called Life is a Learning Curve, because we have to be able to get to a point where we can open up to new information and not have it threaten our very existence, that something about me must be horrible if I need to change this, rather than thinking it's just a life of continual improvement, and when new information comes in, but then I can't expect myself to just be an expert at it. I had this doctorate, and sometimes people will be so impressed, and I'm like, yeah, but it took me like 14 years to get it, And then when they talk to me, they're like, yeah, but you did it while you were like helping raise grandchildren, and you were going to, I had a full-time job. And when I first started my career, I was a single mom, and I never gave myself any credit for that. I never really took a look because I was trying to survive. So it was always the next step, what to do next all the time. And I really came out of it. Like by the time the kids were launched and everybody's off and, they're on their own, I really came out of it looking at myself going, who are you? That was really shocking to me. And I had done a lot of work and growth on myself, but I just hadn't really sat. You used a word when you talked about your period. Nobody celebrated it. Those little milestones in our life, they're supposed to be celebrated. I have a new grandson, and I haven't got to hold him. I haven't got to touch him because of COVID. I haven't got to be there when he was born like I was with the other babies. But every time my daughter, she's so good with us. I mean, she puts these pictures up like every day and videos so I can just, and when he first started doing this, I was like, oh, he's trying to suck his thumb, and we're celebrating it, and then he finally rolled over and it was like, oh, he's rolling over, but we didn't say, oh, you're rolling over, now you need to crawl. So what we do, we celebrate it right with where we're at. And what that teaches us, if we have people that do it in our lives, is we get to celebrate ourselves. that movement forward. So, okay, today I have new information from you. So, whatever I take away from it and decide to implement it, I'm just going to celebrate today that I got this new information. And then tomorrow I'll take another step and I'll celebrate that step. And then the next day I'll take another step and I'll celebrate that step, because that feels so much better to me than hypercriticism. That feels so much better than me beating up on myself or wallowing in that low self-esteem. And I really truly believe that although my self-esteem is still, wavering, I think I can build that back up again. And it's not about self-esteemable. We have to take actions of esteemable actions in order to heal that self-esteem. But it's also about the exuberance of life, to be able to celebrate that. Because like you, nobody really noticed. I didn't have anything horribly, traumatic like that happened, because I can imagine that, just listening to you, I was like, oh yeah, that would have been something else. I didn't have somebody who told me exactly what to expect. And so when mine came on in the middle of the night and I had horrible, horrible pain, I thought I was dying. And my bedroom was in the lower level. Everybody else was upstairs. I had a little more privacy than everybody else. And I literally crawled out of my bed, crawled upstairs, and laid outside my parents' door because I didn't want to wake them up. And I just laid there thinking I just wanted to be close enough to him in case I died. They would see me in the morning when they stepped out their door. That's how dramatic I was about the whole thing, And I don't mean dramatic. It felt that bad.
Yeah.
But when they finally explained to me what happened, I remember the next month, I remember walking around thinking, I got my period. It was like I did celebrate it in my head, and it made me feel feminine. I thought, oh, I'm a girl, and I don't know where I got that, Judy, because girls were not celebrated in my house, but some part of me did, and I did that for myself. And so I think, we do, that's what I call resilience, of being able to like give ourselves, but that was in one area. There were other areas where I couldn't see myself at all, and I think I might've done that because as the oldest, I was also mothering my younger siblings, so maybe I was more in touch with that piece of it, So anyway, I'm really thrilled with what you're sharing today. I think that our listeners are, going to get a different perspective. I mean, food is about nurturance, but it's also about enjoying the taste of it. I don't know if you've ever heard of Janine Roth, but she has a book out called, I think it's Women, Food, and God. And she talks about how little we actually enjoy the sensation of our food. Like when I eat an orange, I've noticed the flavor is zesty. It's delightful. I'm like looking for new words to describe what it tastes like, because I think that's part of the process. Our food nurtures us and it heals us and it sustains us, but there's no reason why we can't have fun with it. One of the things about traveling is I love looking at different cultural backgrounds, with food. And I noticed that here in the United States, we seem to season with salt, pepper, and sugar, and in other multicultural, they have so many different spices. And then I discovered in college, there's this one little tidbit that I found out that just blew my mind. So we can measure sound waves. We can measure like your sight, but and you have like rods and cones in the back. The rods are for black and white and the cones are for color, but that's all biochemical in the brain. The one thing they still can't measure yet is your olfactory, your sense of smell. And then I found research that says the more you smell your food before you eat, the more your system tells you you're satiated. So when we go to fast foods where there's only grease, salt, sugar, and flour, we smell something, but it's not what our brain needs to smell. Our brain needs to smell. Those restaurants, I actually enjoy sitting there watching them create the food in front of you. But the other thing is you get to smell it. It smells, and that helps shut that down, and those are the kind of things that I never knew before, as well as what you're telling us about, how specific foods, and there's certain foods that we need to sustain our body, and the minerals and the vitamins. And I didn't know, my doctor's really good about it. Her and her husband are from India originally, and they do health seminars in their home for free and teach us about how we need to put more seeds and nuts and things back into our diet. What I hear from you is it can actually be even more individualistic about your body. My body might be different. and that we need to be, so that kind of implies to me I need to be in touch with how the food, not only the sensation of the food, the smell of the food, but how is that food affecting me? I mean, this is all new information, I think, for most of us.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why I was so excited when we were talking about doing this podcast. Now, do you see what I see?
Yes.
Yes.
So thank you for also mentioning like how it affects us, like bringing me back to that part is, one of the things that I realized too was, and I think I mentioned something about like domestic violence, and I want to leave on an up note, but truly like that was a piece that I want to inject here, that when I was eating flour and sugar or processed foods that my body had this reaction to, it was like alcohol to the alcoholic. And I was not able to control my emotions. And now add that on top of unresolved childhood issues. It was like a volcano, like all the ingredients for this volcano to like blow up. And so there was a vicious cycle between, okay, so I'm eating foods that is triggering something inside of me. Now my child does something that triggers my inner child that has an unresolved issue. And I'm like, oh, I like blew my top and I couldn't stop at times. And so that's another reason I'm so passionate about this, because I didn't realize that, like, the fact that I didn't have the B vitamins, that that was something my mother told me like years later, like when I got into recovery or whatever. She goes, oh God, I wish I had these B vitamins when you guys were little, because she lost it on us too. So it was like I saw that history, being repeated. Right. And when she told me about those B vitamins, that was so crucial, because I started taking them and I found myself able to stay calm, and things weren't bothering me. I was able to deal with those unresolved issues in therapy. It's like that was another piece of the puzzle is, please take away the stigma of going to a therapist, because they're there to help. They're there as
they're no different than going to your physical doctor. You've got a physical doctor and an emotional doctor. And here's the point, Judy, that I keep putting across on these podcasts. All of this is in here in the brain, because this is like your, what do they call that? The cockpit of the plane. So all of your control panels there, you don't sit there and think, oh, this control panel is better than that control panel. You need all of them, right? They're all there to get you to safety. And then you've got the control tower too, So my point to people is mental health issues, physical issues, emotional issues. All of this is biochemically wired into the brain, and it doesn't separate them out. I mean, there's different functions for different parts of the brains, but they're all co-joined together. And when we got in trouble was when we started separating these things and then giving labels to them, like, okay, mental illness was like crazy, or physical disabilities, rather than realizing we're all on a continuum called being a human,
And life happens.
Yes.
And the thing is, like, knowing what to do is like, we have to be taught what to do. It's like we're expected to know how to handle these situations when we were never taught how to take care of ourselves emotionally. And nutrition, as I said, is a foundational piece of that. And so, like, my whole point of this talk is to stop putting the cart before the horse. We have to get that horse before this cart. And, so I wanted to share some, different things that maybe people could Google or put into YouTube, that were, it's like anything that you want to know any day, that's the way I do things. Is like, if I have a problem with codependency, I'm going to Google or I'm going to YouTube codependency. If I have an issue with, something emotional or some kind of compulsion or something, like, I'm going to Google it, or I'm going to, do the YouTube. And there's just so much out there. It's right there at your fingertips. Our public library, all these like free resources are right there at our fingertips. I do want to I don't know if I'm allowed to. Am I allowed to plug Starting Point,
Oh,
which was
you can go right ahead.
okay? So where I actually started my journey of all places was called Starting Point, and their website is startingpoint.org. And they have just so much information. And what I loved about that place too is, number one, they house probably like all kinds of 12-step recovery meetings, but also the therapists that I've experienced there have done their inner work. I think that's really huge, that it's not just book knowledge, that these people have done their inner work, their personal growth. I wanted to plug Louise Hay. She was very instrumental in helping me to change my thinking so I could change my life. I cannot move forward when I'm in negative thoughts, hateful thoughts towards myself, critical thoughts. I also wanted to plug chiropractic. You mentioned chiropractic, and it's something that I can do on a weekly basis, not just when I feel like my back is out of whack, but to actually like maintain that nervous system, because that is like a key component to my well-being. And also there is I just recently started watching something called Wu Wei. It's WUWEI. And, there's all different topics that this husband and wife team, it's a Taoist teaching, but it's a philosophy. It's not a religion, it's a philosophy. And they literally teach you how to parent yourself when you're in these situations that you find yourself in. So for instance, not being able to stand up for yourself. So I put Wu Wei, stand up for yourself kind of thing, and boom, there it is. So anything you have an issue with, like I was not able to stand up to somebody at work, and it was like they taught me what was going on, what I needed to do, how I needed to parent the parts of me that were like holding me back, holding me back. Like, no, we don't talk about that because, and it's funny because when I grew up, I thought that my parents stole my voice. If I tried to speak up, my face was slapped, or, there's all kinds of craziness that can happen, right? So my inner child believed it's dangerous. It's dangerous to speak up. And she cried to me at one point when I followed this Wu Wei, and she goes, "They stole my voice." And I told her, I said, "No, they didn't steal your voice. You had to give it to them to survive. We don't have to do that anymore."
Yeah.
And it was a real turning point, So they actually teach you how to reframe what the inner child might be thinking that's causing all these problems. And so there's so much out there around self-parenting now, nutrition. It's not about a diet. It really isn't. My husband and son, who they wouldn't buy in for a long time, I said, "Oh, it's as simple as just adding more living foods and they're like, "Yeah, you're right. It isn't like you have to go on this ridiculous diet or whatever, like I have to buy all this stuff and it has to look like this." It's learning what's right for you.
Judy, would you mind spelling Wu Wei again? Am I saying it right?
Wu Wei. It's WUWEI.
I just wanted our listeners to be able to hear that again in case, it went by a little fast. And then I was thinking you did a really good thing there by sharing that with them. And I thought, I mentioned self-compassion. I want to put a plug in there. You can go to selfcompassion.org and find it's actually a quiz. That's what woke me up. And then she has, of course, a book out that's called Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. And, what I liked about some of these resources that we're talking about, these are people that practice what they preach. You're talking about Louise Hay. She was somebody that came in, and then all of a sudden I had this epiphany while you were talking. Every time I have introduced, like I got on calcium not shortly after my period started, because the chiropractor told me, he was mad, and he said, that uterus is a muscle. He said, but it only gets activated once a month. He said, I have football players and athletes that come in all the time, and they get cramps in their legs and their arms. And he said, every single time I put them on a dosage of calcium. He said, because the calcium helps you keep from getting that. So over the years, whenever I was in doubter's mode and I would go off of it for a couple of months, I'll tell you what, those cramps came back with a vengeance. And I go, oh no, he was right. So I get back on. So now I get on calcium. Somebody told me about vitamin B as well along the way. I can't remember who, but you know what? It wasn't a doctor. I haven't had a doctor like the one I have now my entire life, because she tells you that you can change things through food, not by having more food, but by being aware and being conscious and choosing what's right. And she's even let us know that, you can overdo anything. Like, she kind of walks up. I don't know that she understands, and maybe she does, because I don't know what her training is, but she doesn't ever mention addiction. But what she talks about is, like knowing when you've had enough. And she said, it's about how we approach it. It's our philosophy towards it. And that was just eye-opening for me. That was just very incredible. Do you want to, are we coming to our winding down piece? I wanted to make sure before we did that you had the opportunity to tell people if they want to reach out to you, how they could do that, or if you want to refer them someplace, whatever you would like to drop in here towards the end of it, just for the closing piece, so that they can find more about what you're talking about, or more about you personally. I don't want to put you on the spot, but at the same time, go ahead.
At this time, I really only have my contact information. So okay. I'll just let you know that I can be reached at 856-229-2335. And that's Eastern Standard Time. That's a safe cell. And you can leave any information you'd like. And I'll get back to you. Also, my email address is Judy with a Y, L as in Lynn, P as in Pellegrino 1 at AOL.com.
Thank you so much, Judy. I've really enjoyed having you on today, and I'm so glad you agreed to do this. I think that, it's a good opening for people to start looking, at those conscious choices, because we can change our lives. And, there's a lot of things in life we often feel like we can't. So why not start with the things where we do have choices? And really choosing our inner work, has such an impact on the world. It's not I want to end with this. It's not selfish. It's about self-care and self-compassion. And that word self took a bad hit when we were kids, because everything was about being selfish. And it's not that I think people were trying to be mean to us, but they didn't understand child development. They didn't know how to help us maneuver through life. And so it was a word that was used to control and kind of shame us in order to get us not to do what they didn't want us to do. And so, we have to overcome that little stigma of being able to self-compassion, self-care is a good thing, to be able to own responsibility. And responsibility was such an ignited word too. It was like, you need to be responsible, and not knowing what that was. But when you break that word down, it's responsibility. So the ability to respond to the situation, and that takes a whole different flavor than being responsible. It's just about holding accountability for our own behavior. And that I find, I don't know about you, but I find just taking account of my own behavior all the time and staying in my own lane is a full-time job. I don't really have time to go manage other people. So, but then things start falling into place and serendipitous, like all these speakers when I decided to do the podcast, and I didn't sweat and worry about it. I thought, this is something I want to do, and I got excited about it, and then put it out there, and here I am, with people coming in that want to be the change in the world.
Yes.
That makes me excited.
And helping other people to be the change in their world, because
exactly,
it's a ripple effect.
It is a ripple effect.
So if somebody values and respects themselves, they teach others to respect and value them, and so on and so on. And it like starts with you, in your family, in your communities, boom, it's out in the world.
Well, yeah, and then we're modeling it because, like I say, children learn by modeling. But we're all born with this brain that is wired to thrive, survive, and learn. And we do it a lot of times by observing first,
Mm-hmm.
and by watching other people to learn how to do it. And as the gentleman on yesterday's podcast reminded me, he said, and we continue doing that throughout our lives. And I thought, he's right. We do watch other people and think, oh, what's going on over there? What do I need to learn today?
Mm.
So thank you, Judy, so much.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. It was
Oh,
great.
I enjoyed it. Thanks. Have a good day.
You too.